Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session today, Automated Feature Function Testing for IVR Applications. I'm Mike Burke from IR, and I'll be doing most of the talking today. But before we get started, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping details with all of you so you know what's going on here. First of all, there should be a couple of downloads available to you via the BrightTalk site, one of which is the deck we're going to walk through over the next 30 minutes or so. And there's also something of a spec sheet for the toolkit that I'm going to talk about. We ask that you please take a few minutes to rate us at the end of the session. We do want to know what works for you guys and what doesn't work, and we really do appreciate your feedback. This session is, of course, being recorded and will also be available on demand shortly after we're done here. And finally, we will be doing Q&A towards the end of the session, so send in your questions, and we'll get through as many as we can before our hour runs out. And with that, let's get rolling. As I said, I'm Mike Burke, and I've been in the testing business now for a good 18 years. I'm going to talk about something that I truly care about in customer experience testing, and it's something that's really fun to talk about because it's about helping people be successful in the world. I've been involved in lots of engagements, and I've always had a good time with the work that we've done. And today I'm accompanied by my colleague, Carlton Shoei, who's our AFFT subject matter expert. Hey there, Carlton. How about if you jump on the line for a moment here and introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Mike. And just for when you use the acronym AFFT, that's Automated Feature Function Testing. So that'll be kind of used throughout the presentation. But I have over 15 years in the automated development and functional testing of products, services, and testing solutions. We have built software products to functionally test both web and IVR applications, and these products have been used in both the regulated and non-regulated space. I've been working with IR Testing Solutions Group for over 3 years now. It's been a great relationship, and I look forward to your questions and hopefully the technical follow-up after the conclusion of the presentation today. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Carlton. So as I said, I'm going to be talking about customer experience testing, and I'm going to be doing so from a different angle than what I normally talk about. Today I want to share with you a tool set and a service that we've put together at IR that really can be helpful to anyone who owns and or operates a self-service IVR. It'll help you be confident that the applications you've written and put into service to interact with your customers really do what they're supposed to do, no matter what customers throw at the application. It's an automated process for feature function testing, and as Carlton said, we call it AFFT for short, because automated feature function testing is quite the mouthful. So one of the things I like to do is first set the stage. Let's get started by talking a little bit about the case for self-service and why it's important. Well, from the customer perspective, there's a couple of things. One of them is convenience, and there's also preference. But on the convenience thing, how many times do you hear when you're interacting with a brand through an automated process, for your convenience, you can do this or do that? Well, self-service via IVR is one of those things where the concept of convenience really is important, and I agree that IVRs are out there for our convenience. But as I said, preference is important too, because a lot of customers just like to do things by themselves, especially the younger generations that are up there. And of course, from the contact center owner's perspective, it's also about cost reduction, because it's so much less expensive to provide self-service to a customer than to try to serve via an agent. Especially if people want to do things in the middle of the nights or on weekends. You can downstaff overnight and not have to have those expensive agents in place. But the problem with technology is that it all has to work. And that means that it has to work the way you intended at every twist and turn, and you have to prove to yourself that it really does work the way you intended it to. Otherwise, all those smiling faces on your customers go sideways. And you don't want to put out technology that gets between you and your customers in a way that causes a bad experience. You want to have technology out there that's doing the things that you want it to do. So, what's going on in the world of the IVR application? Or maybe over the first year of an IVR or onward into operations. Well, it's a complicated space. One of the things that's really interesting about IVR and the voice channel and the contact center is that it's a crossover of functionality between the voice domain and the data processing domain. IVR apps are just a lot harder to test than software that lives in just one domain, the data processing domain, because of that crossover. And then there's what the IVRs do in terms of the interaction with customers. There's identification, authentication, and then the operation, people actually retrieving the information. There's lots going on, and the IVR and the entire environment has to do a lot to be able to serve up an account balance or or the estimated arrival for a flight. It's not nearly as simple as IVRs make it sound when they do the things that they're supposed to do. And then once an IVR goes into application, once an IVR goes into operation, it's going to evolve, maybe monthly, maybe quarterly, or whatever. Try to adjust the way it's functioning and adjust the flow to achieve better containment, or the kind of tuning that's done for efficiency and effectiveness. But they really are living things, and they're constantly evolving. And if you think about, in today's world, a website is the company's front door. The IVR is another door. It's a portal into your environment that your customers are going to walk through, and you need to make sure that when they're interacting with your brand, that as they come through the doorway, they get the experience that you intend. The bottom line is that you better make sure that it works, period, because if it doesn't, you're in trouble. So there's a huge challenge to all this. You've got to test, but there's loads and loads and loads of code, and there's functionality and infrastructure underneath the IVR that are there to make it work. And keeping up with all that is a real challenge for QA. It's what's a QA guy to do? Well, if you think about it, in the QA world, what are your real choices? Well, three things come to mind. There's probably more, but if you boil it down, you can roll the dice and just go live and assert that you've managed risk out of the process and everything's going to work exactly the way you would expect it to. Or maybe you've got a couple of key test cases that you execute, and you know that if these 10 or 20 or whatever work well, that you're probably all right. But really, if depending upon your personal sense of adventure and whatever risk tolerance you bring to the table, you might prefer 100% coverage, and there are ways to get there, especially for environment where there's zero risk tolerance. But assuming testing is the only sane route to take, what are your options? Well, oftentimes in this space, what people do is they go the manual testing route because that's what's available to you. And now with manual testing, you've got lots of people. You need detailed instructions, everything written out, sheets and lots of Excel spreadsheets and tabs, lots and lots of time. I've personally gotten out a flow chart with red and green pencils and made the phone calls, and I got to tell you, it's really not much fun. But when it needs to be done, you got to do it. But depending on the dimensions of your IVR application, you may need several people and long lists of test case scripts because, of course, there's many different paths through your environment. Now, from a manual perspective, you can use your own staff, or you can job it out. But when you job it out, you're ending up with bills. But that's the alternative to using your own staff. If testing IVR apps is your staff's day job, and then you've got people doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, but running with the assumption that most organizations don't have 5 to 10 or maybe even 20 people in their organization that are constantly doing IVR application validation, you're diverting them from their normal day job to help you get an IVR app rolled out. And if it takes 5, 10, or 20 of your own people to do it, it's going to take a number of contractors as well, and with that comes a bill. So it's expensive, it takes time, but there's also the kinds of results that you get from manual testing. Maybe you get a list that's got green check marks and red X's on it, like I said before. Testers may have to make more than one telephone call if they actually try to do something or transcribe an error when they hear it because it all goes by so fast. And if they detect an issue, how do they know it isn't something they did? But maybe they entered the wrong digits or didn't wait long enough, or barged it in too early or something like that. In this space, it's also really important to provide recordings to the developers because they're the ones who've got to fix things, and the recording is worth 1,000 word in this space. So you have to make sure that you've got some mechanism, even if you're doing manual testing, to get recordings. If you don't provide those recordings, the first thing your designer developers are going to do is make another phone call and see if the person who identified the issue actually got it right. And we know recordings are important because people we work with all the time tell us that if I hadn't heard it, I wouldn't have believed it. But now that I've heard it, I think I know what's going on. So if you're using manual testing and making phone calls over and over again and trying to transcribe things, the days really do just fly by, and it can become problematic. So what makes the most sense is to add automation to the process and automate as much of the process as you can, because automation brings a lot to the table. The items that you see on this list, automation is really good at repetition and precision and data collection, all that boring stuff. And nobody really likes making all those test calls, call after call, but machines don't really care. Now, as far as automation goes, you get to decide how far you want to go with it. The more you choose to, or the more you can automate, the more leverage you're going to have as a QA manager, and with the greater amount of automation that you have, the more time you're going to save. There's also a lot less staff diversion, and if you're somebody who normally outsources when you do this, you're going to have lower contractor fees. So with automation, what you find out is that one or two people can probably do the work of an army of testers, and it's a really cool process to watch work. We've gathered some statistics over the years with the work that we've done, and this is what we've learned. You can gain back not only your staff time, but wall and calendar time, which potentially makes those frequent IVR application releases doable. Automated test call scoring, reporting, and all that doesn't need breaks to go to the bathroom. It works nights and weekends, and once the QA manager kicks off the process, that individual can move on to other tasks while the automated test process runs and runs and runs. So check out these efficiencies that are on this chart. We've documented these over the last 10 years, as we've said. They're real. But there's a but about all this stuff. It's not just having automation, it's having the right kind of automation. And I want to talk today here a little bit about IR's approach. IR's approach is a combination of tools, people, and automation that comes together in a process that really works well for you. You can't just throw a computer and some coding and a SIP trunk at somebody and expect them to generate a bunch of test cases and run test activity. It takes a combination of these things, tools, people, and automation, to make the process effective and efficient. And I want to share now a little bit about what IR has done to put all this together. So IR's approach is to do with each of these three elements the things that they do best. So the toolkit we've got really does create an efficient and organized environment. You have to have a good tool set to get started. And then bringing people into the game. People, of course, do what people do best. They decide what's important, and they also define success and failure. People apply judgment, and that's really important, and they create strategy. And then automation, as I mentioned before, does the things that it does best, all the boring stuff, but the things that have to be done over and over again and done in a precise fashion without throwing any data away. When you put all these three things together and do it the way we have, you get a very effective way to run a full regression. 100% of the test cases that are required to fully vet out your IVR application, either when it's first being introduced or on an ongoing basis after you make changes to it, for any of the reasons we talked about before, to maybe get better containment or to do some A/B testing or maybe support a marketing rollout. So the toolkit itself, let's talk a little bit more about each one of these elements. The toolkit itself and the framework for everything I'm talking about today is the Clin Test Suite from Reality Corp. The Clin Test Suite cut its teeth and was validated in the pharmaceutical industry because it was supporting clinical drug trials. You can count on it to get the job done. And then within that framework, we're also using apps that are standard in every office today, Microsoft Excel and Word. Microsoft Excel and Word are the mechanisms that we use to organize the information, to drive the test case process, collect the data, and document the results. And then woven into that whole process is Dragon from Nuance, which is the mechanism that we're using to gather and transcribe the IVR dialogue in real time as test calls are progressing. ClinTest automatically does the scoring as the results populate on a step-by-step basis to create formal test results documentation while the test calls are being placed. And because this kind of testing happens over and over again in at least 50 to 60% of the environments, it's not just an IVR application that goes out there and lives there for the next 3 or 4 years without any changes to it. Once you've got a test case library built and you're conducting regressions on a monthly or quarterly basis to confirm that the application extensions are working the way they're supposed to, we've got all the data stored in a SQL database so that you have the ability to easily dig out comparisons on test runs or previous test cases to see what was happening in the past and compare it to what's going on right now. And then, the people in our process, or maybe it's just one person, whoever the lead tester is. That person creates the test case scripts and of course defines the environment in which everything is going to work. AFFT, the way we do it, does require somebody to kick things off and run the show. It's not a sentient machine all by itself. But having a great toolkit available frees your staff from that cumbersome task of making, scoring, and documenting thousands of test calls all by themselves. Usually the lead tester or the QA engineer is instrumental in creating the test case library within the ClinTest environment and deciding which test cases should be built, whether the library is going to be comprehensive or perhaps it's just going to cover the happy path through the IVR application, though we really don't recommend that. One of the things we've come to realize in this space is that there's often 2 to 3 times as many negative test cases as there are the happy path test cases. And by happy path, I mean the people who respond to the actual prompts and menu inputs they're asked for, as opposed to putting the out of grammar or out of limit inputs. Like the menu says press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for something else, and they go ahead and push a 6, or maybe they don't do anything. Those negative test cases, there can be many, many more of them than the happy path, and sometimes in the rush to get an application out, those are the test cases that get overlooked in a manual testing environment because there can be just so many of them. When you've got an automated testing process in the game, you can make sure that all of those are actually taken into account and in an automated execution process actually get executed. So that brings us to the automation part. Automation is the main reason for the session today, and with ClinTest automation in play, test calls can be configured to run one after another, hundreds of calls, thousands of calls, one after another, just cranking along. There's no reason to skip over those negative tests to save time or to get through the process or to not be as overwhelming for your testers. You need to know things like, in the negative world, that the IVR really does reprompt after an unvoiced input, or after somebody does an out of grammar input, and that the application does what it's supposed to do and reprompts rather than maybe default route right out to an agent, or maybe even drop in the telephone call because it doesn't know what to do with an unvoiced input. And then, as each test call is executing, Dragon's working in the background, listening to the audio that's heard, and the ClinTest process compares the transcription to the expected dialogue at every step. Does so in real time, and depending upon the delivery model that you choose, you can actually watch the scoring happen and the results populate as the process is going on. But I'll talk a little bit more about delivery later. It's kind of fun to watch 1 or 2 calls, but after that, it's also kind of like watching paint dry. So I don't recommend it, but it can be interesting to see the process run past. So how does ClinTest put it all together? Well, here's a look at the architecture. It's a top-down structure that organizes test case scripts and the results that are collected. All the results are available in both abbreviated and summary form, as well as in very detailed transcripts, as well as with step-by-step recordings, and ultimately, as I said before, stored in a SQL database. It's a very comprehensive but also layered approach to presenting the data so that you get what you need on a step-by-step basis. ClinTest itself uses a standard structural and procedural process to create test case scripts that control all test call progress, ensuring that the right inputs happen at the right time and are generated in the sequence you intend at the time that you intend. None of this second guessing that happens with manual testing. Did I actually do that right? That's the kind of thing that gets in the way of manual testing. This kind of process eliminates the do-overs, and it saves you precious time, time and time again, on all of your regressions, on all of your releases. It's really cool, and it really works. So on a step-by-step basis, let's talk about ClinTest a little bit. It's what you would expect, I guess. Make a call, generate the inputs, listen to the system, gather and process the responses, and score the outcomes against the expectation, and then publishing the results. So the process is easy to talk about. It's similar to what a human being would do, of course, except that automation is doing it. But the next thing I'd like to share with you is what it really looks like. So let's take a look at some of the outputs and talk about, or look at some of the control and some of the outputs and talk about what it takes to make all this happen. So batch control is a key element of this. Batch control is what we use to create the test case sequences that are running. And this all happens within Excel, so you don't have to learn to be a programmer. Test case script organization is up to the QA lead or whoever's in charge of the whole process, but one normal arrangement is for people to create test packets of scripts that are associated with each main menu option. So if your main menu says press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 for something else, you might have a packet that takes the one and has all the test cases that flow out from it, and a similar organization for the digit 2 option or the digit 3 option. But who's ever configuring the execution batch can tee up either all the test case scripts that have been configured in the entire library, or maybe just tee up a packet, or maybe just a couple of test cases within a packet. It's not an all or nothing thing. You've got infinite levels of specification available to you. And in a rerun situation where you want to make sure that you fixed a couple of things, you might just want to run a handful of test cases within each packet. With ClinTest and the batch control that's made available to you, you've got control at the top level where you can grab everything within the packet, or you can just drop into the packets and do a couple of test cases. And if you take a look at that chart, you can see that there's ways that you can halt the batch execution at various points if you decide that a particular error, if it should occur, means that it doesn't make sense to go ahead and run another 2,500 or 3,000 telephone calls. Maybe you want to stop and generate an alert that says, hey, we had an ab-end. But it's your choice. You can set up the system to keep running when an error is detected, or stop and let you know. It's up to you, and you get to configure it. So in terms of results, as I mentioned before, there's layered results that populate as the batch executes. So we're building, or the process, I should say, builds detailed transcripts, documents the scores, organizes the recordings in a way that you can drop right down through them. I'm going to take a look, or provide a look at each one of the published instruments here in just a moment. But with the documentation that we've put together, you get pointers to the specific issues that were identified, so you don't have to go through a mountain of documentation looking for the issues yourself. Here's what it looks like. So the first thing that happens when a batch runs, whether it terminates normally or it ab-ends because of one of those early execution failures, the first thing you get is an email that tells you what happened, and it's got the basic batch stats that you would expect. How long did it take to run, how many test cases were executed, how many passed, how many failed, the kinds of things that you basically need to know so that you understand what's happening. The next level document that you get after you've gotten the email that says, hey, I've finished the batch, you go into that ClinTest information architecture that I talked about a little bit ago and look at the summary report. And the summary report gives you a list of the test cases, the specific ones that passed and failed. And there's one other outcome that I wanted to mention at this point in time that I haven't mentioned before that's called manual verification. And manual verification is that state that you can configure. Again, the QA manager, when they're figuring out what level of comparison counts as a fail versus a pass, there's often kind of a middle zone called manual verification, where it might be a good idea to go ahead and listen to the audio and find out whether it's just maybe a word that was changed in the dialogue, but the meaning is still the same. But there is an outcome that suggests that you just want to go listen to it and generate the score yourself to decide whether or not you think it should be scored as a pass or a fail ultimately. The results that you need and that everybody needs are details. The audio that's transcribed by Dragon is dropped into Excel and lives right next to the expected dialogue from the environment. This, of course, is configured ahead of time, and you also see on a step-by-step basis the pass-fail indication on a step-by-step basis, as well as the score. Now, you get this for every test call, and as I said before, because the summary report tells you exactly which test cases passed or failed and require your attention, you know exactly which ones to go to get the transcript. Now, the transcript in and of itself is cool, but the transcript, as we've prepared it here in Excel, doesn't yet include the audio file. That's included in the Word file. And so the cool part about this is, again, you see the expected dialogue, the transcript from Dragon, but here you also get to hear the audio that was heard by the system, and this is where the developers and the people who are going to fix the issues get to learn what was really happening, what the system really heard. And finally, as I mentioned before, you may have multiple executions over time, month after month, quarter after quarter. And what we do is populate a database with all the test case script execution results, so that you can do standard extracts from the database to do comparison on a test case by test case basis, or maybe success or fail of runs based on a time period. It's a database, so you get to decide how you want to get through the data and do the comparisons yourself. Now, how do we deliver all this? Well, we've got some different delivery models available to you. It's a really powerful toolkit, and it helps you get the job done in a comprehensive fashion that's effective and efficient. But as you guys in the audience know, this is a lot of work, and there's just an unbelievable amount of data that comes out of these processes. So we've got a couple of different options for you. And one of them is that IR Testing Solutions is a managed testing services company, and so we do make all this available to you as a managed service, where we do all the work based on IVR application design documentation that you provide to us, and usually that's VUIs and Visios and dialogue transcripts and anything else that is defining what your system is supposed to be doing. But because you don't have to be a programmer to make all this stuff work, you can actually buy seat licenses and get some training on how ClinTest works, which we do provide, and you'll learn how to organize test cases, how to define and configure the environment, how to configure the batches and run them, and learn some strategies and tactics for getting the job done. And you can do it yourself and maybe be up and running in as little as a week or two. But if you like, we can also deliver all of this in a hybrid scenario. And by hybrid scenario, I'm talking about a situation where we work together to maybe use the expertise that we have on our team to create a test case library and then deliver the library to you for execution within your environment. We're always available on a pro services basis to work with you and give you the types of services that you need. And Carl, at this point, I'd like to throw the mic back over to you and ask you to speak to a typical use case that we've encountered.
Thanks, Mike. The one that comes to mind, it was they asked us to do a managed services for them, but it's a U.S.-based company, and they're throughout the United States. They have a number of call centers that they support, and their IVR system really processes a lot of their critical data. They also take data in through the web, so there's a reliance on interaction with the web and then also interaction with the IVR. What they did is they would have a release schedule that would run on a quarterly basis, and they would do full regressions that would include all the previous run test scripts, test cases, plus any new ones that essentially test out the new functionality that's going to be going live. They had 5 internal staff doing their own job that would be redirected to the manual testing. That process on a quarterly basis took about a lapse time up to 20 days, 15 to 20 days for them to go through the full regression run. We ended up automating, quite a large number of test scripts that we put in a library, and then when they wanted a full regression, they would let us know, and we would run the full regression, and we would give them back all the test results that essentially the product ClinTest produces that Mike reviewed with you in a 2-day turnaround time. So essentially, what were the savings for this? They're really significant. Their 20 days, elapsed time times 5 is really 100 man days of testing that they did. We were able to reduce that to actually 2 days. That really only, in terms of labor, was only hours instead of man days. So we actually reduced the time, from 20 days to 2, which really allowed them to, from their people allocation point of view, they allowed their people to do the job that they're responsible for, which is their job, as opposed to be redirected to manual testing. And that really just kind of illustrates the power of automation. Let a tool do what it does best in terms of what Mike has talked about, but also allows your staff, in essentially, to concentrate on those critical core areas. So we were really pleased with the result of that. The client, of course, was pleased with that, and the success of the automation was extremely significant. Back to you, Mike.
Well, thanks, Carlton, for providing some additional details there. So, that basically gets us to the end of our session. And before we go into Q&A, I just wanted to do a quick wrap up. As Carlton said, automation gives you the opportunity to harvest days and to harvest staff hours and keep people doing the things that they do best, reducing your cost and also accelerating your ability to put out releases with high confidence that it's been 100% tested. It's it's a key value prop of using automation, and especially the way that we've put our testing process together. And one of the important things that I do want to emphasize is that the way we create the test case library by using the design specification and documentation, we really are testing against the intention for the application, not just the realization of the application. We're creating test cases, or you'll be creating test cases that verify that the code that's been written really does what the specification says that it's supposed to do. And then, of course, you get to pick how picky you want to be. You get to decide if you want to set up every possible test case, which is what we recommend because this process makes it easy and efficient. But you may only want to do the happy path and maybe a couple of the out of grammar or out of range inputs to make sure that there aren't any glaring issues. It all depends upon what you want to do. You get to pick. But it's really a great way to put your IVR application into production with confidence, whether it's the initial release or it's regressions on an ongoing basis. So, we encourage you to think about what this brings to your world and how it might make your world more pleasant to work in. Okay, so with that, I'd like to take a few moments out here to take a look at some questions. So, Carlton, I'm going to ask you here to respond to a couple of questions that we've got. Let's see, what do you think? Got one here that says manual testing. I've been doing manual testing, and I've already got a test case library in Microsoft Excel. Can you what can you do to take advantage of that? Carlton, you out there, or did I lose you? Ooh. I'm not hearing Carlton, so I'm going to answer for him. I'm I know that we've encountered this before because manual testing is the dominant mode in the world out there. Lots of people have test cases that are documented either in Excel or in Word tables, and we can figure out how to move that into our process and create a Clin test case library based on those, and run the process based on documentation that you've already put together and works for you. So we don't have to start from scratch, but we're certainly willing to do that.
Mike, excuse me, Mike, I just got disconnected. I had to come right straight back in, so I just missed your question. Do I need to add anything to what you said?
No, I've been talking for you, Carlton, no problem. But here's another one we've got here. How long does it take to tee up a typical Clin test environment?
There's two parts to this. One is just basically configuring Clin test so it can interact with the IVR system and creating a voice profile so that it can essentially do text-to-speech and speech-to-text for the prompts coming through. And that is essentially hours worth of work. The next piece is in terms of building test scripts. From if we're building them or we train it's the licensing do-it-yourself. The way we've designed the product is that essentially, as Mike kind of illustrated and went through, is that we have the project and then we have test packets, and test packets consist of test scripts. So essentially, let's say a test packet is main menu processing. So I can build a test packet that essentially does all the positive testing for main menu down to the second subset menu, and then I can do all the negative testing. And essentially, that can be released and ready to go within a day, 2 days. So you have a test packet for manual or for the main menu. And then everything else you do, whether it's payments, eligibility, whatever the functionality that you're trying to test, you'd build a test packet around that. So essentially, almost from day one, you can start running the automation against your system and start seeing the test results. And then you just keep on adding new test packets and new test scripts to the test script library. So it's a very, very quick turnaround. You get almost instant feedback from the process.
So time to value is very rapid, which is great, and the value builds over time as you add more to the environment. That sounds pretty cool. Now, what if somebody wants to see this all in action? How do people get a demo?
What we would do is essentially schedule a demo. It would be a WebEx session, and what we do is go through, and we have a live demo that we can run, which basically we would review all the test scripts, we'd review the call flow, review the test scripts we're going to execute them for you, so you can see the ClinTest UI running at the desktop level that Mike brought attention to. As one of the features. If you want to do it, it does run in background, so you don't have to see it and lock up a desktop or a device in that area. And then we review all the results and take questions and talk about configuration that we do. So essentially, that's a scheduled event. You would probably need to allocate maybe up to an hour for us to go through that and handle the technical questions, be it a managed services or be it a licensing do-it-yourself kind of situation. Okay,
sounds good. And for those of you out there that are already in the IR universe, if you've got an account exec online, you can certainly contact them. But you can also contact either Carlton or me. We've got some information here on the screen, and of course, this is also in the deck that's available that's available for download. So please give us a yell, get in contact with us either via the website and the contact me forms, or send an email directly to either Carlton or me, and we'd be happy to work with you to put a program together. Now the other information that's available here is about IR in general, and I'd say don't forget to download the deck, and once you get the deck, you'll be able to click on any of the links in these bubbles that'll bring you to demonstrations, information about what IR does more broadly than just automated feature function testing. And I think it's a wealth of information that'll help anybody who's involved in operating and managing the contact center environment and providing a pleasing customer service experience to people who interact with their brands through their contact center technology. So with that, I'd like to say thanks again to everybody for your interest, for your time, and for your attention during our presentation. We hope to hear from you. So have a great day, and thanks.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.